Thanks for joining our governed stage Q&A meeting. Just for those of you who are new to this structure, we've pre-recorded the presentation here. So this meeting is focused just on any Q&A that may have come out of our quarterly strategy presentation. So that being said, Yushen, if you want to get started, I think you've got the first item there.
Yeah, definitely. Before the questions, I will say, I was really happy to see that there was mention of a convergence point between compliance pipelines and security policies. I watched a secure video first, and that was one of my big questions. And then I watched a govern video, and it was like one of the first things that was covered. So that's a big thumbs up. Saw that was the Q1 next year, I believe. So now on to the actual questions I had was, I know that we're going to have, when we triage a vulnerability, there's going to be a reason for setting that triage status. And curious if that's a static list or if it's something that, customers will, and I'm sure they'll ask, to, customize and add their own reasons.
So for now, it is a static list. If you receive feedback in the field, that is something that they're wanting to do and modify and what they would want to add. I'd love to hear that feedback.
Awesome. Thank you, Alana. Compliance adherence reports. So this one's another question where it's kind of tough for me to ask because it's so loosely bounded. But of course, when we think about compliance, there is mention in the recording about, we're not going to go become a full-blown compliance company, right? We're a platform company. The messaging, maybe there's room to improve on the security front, but we are not going to become a quote-unquote pure security and compliance company or a GRC company. I was wondering, for the compliance reports, adherence reports, do we have a notion of what external data sources we will either be ingesting or exporting data to and from? I think ingesting would be, of course, the most important use case for us, or is that fairly open-ended at this juncture?
Yeah, I mean, right now, we're not planning on having any integrations to ingest data from other sources at the beginning. That could be something that comes later. Right now, we're going to focus on GitLab, project settings, pipelines, things like that are more directly related to what we're doing. But the external to GitLab, right now, there's no plans to pull in anything else.
Got it. Thank you for that. And then finally, and this one, I'll caveat by saying it may just be a misunderstanding on my part of what guest users are capable of. My impression, and the way it's called out in the current docs, although I just looked again and there is an asterisk, is that guest users cannot approve merge requests. So I was just wondering the role-based approval of scam policies. I think the recording had indicated that guest users could potentially be approvers. Am I misunderstanding that, or is there going to be something special for guest users in an upcoming release that doesn't exist today?
Yeah, so I think we had a mix-up with the Zoom links here. So thanks everyone who just joined. Grant, did you hear that, or do we need to repeat it?
No, I was reading the question in the doc previously, and that's something I think, Alan, you and I, we can just kind of double check that. But I believe if the user has guest access to the development project, they should be able to potentially manage those approvals. But I think that is something we should double check and see if there's any limitations for that type of user. Cool. Alan, do you have any thoughts on that one?
No, I was checking it right now, but I didn't have answers yet. So yeah, we'll double check.
Yeah, maybe we'll have an answer before the end of the call.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. And I guess Sam and Derek, we have GitLab webinars here again. So I guess if you want to confirm that's a bot or a person, throwing it out there, but that's the end of my questions.
Yeah, who is that GitLab webinars attendee? They're not owning up to it. I don't think we're covering anything too confidential here anyway. So I think we're probably okay to proceed, but that is a good question. Tim, looks like you've got the next question here transferred over from our previous one.
Yeah, sorry about that. As I was writing it, I was like, I think I'm asking it in the wrong group. I was curious if there was a vision for notifications for vulnerabilities to make detections a bit louder on non-default branches. I had a recent customer that was like, hey, we ship, we publish projects that other companies download and run. Be great if we could use GitLab releases here, and then just have a rolling, like, to get alerted when there's vulnerabilities that are found in like N-3 releases. And I was like, hey, that sounds like a really great thing. We don't really do anything. I mean, you could run a pipeline, a scheduled pipeline on those, but you would have to disable running those pipelines, and you'd have to then manually go into the pipeline, like, security tab to even see the vulnerabilities, but that might even be problematic because there's no way to diff between that and the default branch. It seemed like we would not be a good provider there, and I was just curious if there was things there.
Yeah, so I dropped a link to an Epic tracking the feature request to track vulnerabilities on non-default branches. So even before we do something more advanced like notifying, or including notifications, we'd have to first start tracking those. For container images specifically, and this is going back and forth between secure and governed, so I'm sorry, but we have plans to continuously scan all container images in the GitLab container registry. So depending on what sort of an artifact you were releasing, if you're releasing a container image, there might be a path to getting some better visibility into that in the next 6 to 12 months potentially. But yeah, Alana, I don't know if you have more to add here.
I think the only thing I will add is that it just hasn't been prioritized in the coming year. So something that we're thinking about and considering, but not something we're actively pursuing at this time.
Makes sense.
Tim, would being able to just switch the branches and the vulnerability report be adequate?
I could go ahead and just kick GitLab webinars out.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that now. So it's not just as simple as just adding a dropdown to filter and select based off of branch, because we're actually not storing those vulnerabilities for non-default branches in our database. So it actually would be a rather extensive effort. It's a lot more than just adding a filter, drop-down filter.
Yeah, makes sense.
I think in the meantime, my team might consider doing a dynamic pipeline that then kicks off downstream pipelines that does solves for this. But I was curious as to whether or not it would be worth investigating, and it seems like it might be good to have some sort of solution in place in the short term for the next year. My next question was about the dependency list improvements. Super exciting to see the stuff that's coming in this, and it's fruit of the dependency database, which is pretty cool. So specific to the group level dependency list, will all the being able to search, finding a vulnerable dependency in all the projects quickly, will that come to fruition with that search bar on the dependency list at the group
So
level?
you're asking specifically about search, not necessarily like the fields that are available within the dependency list.
Yeah, the search thing popped out at me as like amazing.
I think we will have some basic search, but we are going to, so we're shipping the group level dependency list, and then we are also going back and holistically looking at our searching, filtering, grouping capabilities for the vulnerability report and the dependency list at both the project and the group level. So that might not be there in the first iteration.
Okay.
It'll probably just be fairly basic. Yeah, was there anything else that you saw in those designs that stuck out?
No, I think like given that we're kind of categorizing or like storing more of this in the database, one thing that customers have consistently been asking for has been like, hey, can you identify all the or all the dependencies that are out of date? Who cares if it's secure or insecure for using something from 3 years ago and it's been upgraded 20 times? We might want to move to something that's a little bit more upgraded.
Yeah, that's not something we had included, but that's great feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add on that note, the way that we're implementing things. So I don't know how much you've been following along with the whole namespace initiative, Tim, but
Well, yeah.
right now the current dependency list is at the project level and it's tied to the project object. The new implementation, we're hoping to build it associated with the namespace object so that we have the same backend code that's used for groups and subgroups initially, and then eventually we'll replace the current project level view with that same one, that the code that we're using for the group and subgroup. So eventually that dependency list will have that same backend code for project, group, and subgroup. So as we do make improvements to searching and filtering there, those search and filter improvements would most likely, unless there's some engineering limitation that I can't foresee right now, like most likely that would be available across all of those levels with full feature parity. So we'd be able to implement the searching and filtering once and have it apply everywhere.
One other piece of feedback. I'm assuming so on slide 17, the ability to like create saved views that would persist across all teams and not just an individual. Is that safe to say? Okay,
Yes.
that's great.
Yep, it's outside that with the saved views sit outside of that security center, which is the personalized view.
Okay.
With so with being able to identify all the occurrences of a dependency, is that done by, do I just search at that in that bar there and then it will show me all of the projects that have that? If I look for a project like Log4j, like you have an example there, or what is it? How would I get a list of the projects? Is my first question.
Yeah.
That's just.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You're the boss.
So yeah, so if you like imagine on the screenshot on slide 16, when you hover over projects, you will see a list of projects where that dependency exists, and you'll be able to click into from there. And I think in the agenda we have, Tim went ahead and he added the epic that we're working on. The designs, there's a design issue in there that illustrates that, and I will go ahead and link it in the agenda.
That's great. And then the second part that comes up with this question often is, around the remediation aspect of it. And I think the first step of what they want to do is to say, no new deployments can come out of any project until this dependency is fixed. That's like step one, right? So you're not going off and going and solving those in production, but you're saying, if you're going to do any development on this project, you have to solve this before you move forward. Seems like we're close to that, being able to get there. Is there plans to kind of build some enforcement back into that dependency scan or something to, I don't know what that would look like, because it's already in production, right? So it's past that request state. So if I'm doing newly detected, then I guess that'd be the question there. I'm not sure how that worked.
Grant, is that something we could consider solving with security policies.
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, I'm not
So-
sure I quite followed the question there.
Let me see if I understand it.
Yeah.
So, and let me share the screen because we can show what it will look like with projects. So when you click on, you want to know where this JSON 5 exists and what projects will be in there. We're going to add, like, in case you have 103 projects, we'll add the search option. But let's say this is Python 2. And you know that you want to upgrade to Python 3. How can you put a block on maybe some, maybe not all of these are production projects, but some of these you want to put a block on any future changes or any future deployments to these projects until the dependency has been updated to something that doesn't have, or that has to a future dependency. Is that right? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think, obviously the ideal state is say, hey, we identify this package. This package has log4j in it. We want to go find all the projects that have that, but then we also want to remediate them in production. But that's much harder than just saying, okay, the first step that we want to take as an organization is just to block them from doing any development until they fix it. So it enforces them to solve that problem. And so that eliminates probably 90% of their technical debt with this log4j thing, because people are actively developing in these projects. They can't push anything new to production until they fix it. And you can say, we're going to have log4j solved in all these projects pretty quickly, right? And so that's like the first step they're looking for, because when we're talking about something where it's touching 1,000 projects, right, then something like this becomes really important. I've heard this from a lot of customers who, and what they'll say is, one way they'll do that today is with two ways, right? So one is they're either using something like dependency track, right? And they can solve it through there by setting the rules up in dependency track and blocking things, or they'll use, if they're using like Artifactory, there's like the Artifactory, I can't remember the feature for it, but there's some way that you can detect that stuff, and then you can go off and fix all of the containers based on that. In X-Ray, that's right. Thanks, Yuchen. Yeah, in X-Ray you can solve it that way. So that's kind of the ask of how can we do that with GitLab? So that was my first thought when I saw this, is like, oh, we're almost to a place where maybe we can do some sort of, I think a policy would be great, Grant. Does that make sense? Now what we're looking for is go create a policy for all these projects that are defined here, that on any merge request, there's a new policy for that specifically.
Yeah, exactly. And Sam was adding some notes here as well. But yeah, scan result policy for pre-existing vulnerabilities would be a place to start there. And then you could also have for newly detected vulnerabilities if we, that would block this in future cases if there are dependencies that you want to mitigate. So you would define it kind of based on severity. So if it's critical, medium, you can block merge requests that you've detected these vulnerabilities in, and then block merge until the security role or whichever approvers you've defined have reviewed and explicitly approved that for each merge request.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. No, that's great. That's great.
I think I got the next question here. This is a bit of a blend of secure and govern, but super excited to see some of the IDE features coming in. Curious how we see the IDE and the MR security widget coexisting. It looks like, Sam, you got a first response on there.
Yeah, at least for our first iteration, we're focusing just on displaying the same information that you would see in the merge request page in GitLab, but in the IDE, essentially. So we're trying to split things out by newly detected versus previously existing, and let you click on vulnerabilities and view the details of that. The main goal, the main problem that we're solving with the very first iteration is just eliminating the need to jump back and forth between GitLab and your IDE so that you can see everything within one application. I wasn't sure how much, Connor, wouldn't be available. It looks like you're on, Connor. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, so yeah, Sam's totally right about what we're starting with. The reason that we're starting with this is basically to have that consistency and to have something that we can do sooner. If we were to try to, everyone wants to scan locally. If everyone says they want to scan locally, until they realize maybe all the environmental dependencies that every developer's machine has to have and all that. But the first step is what the workflow you'll be able to do is you code, you commit, you push. You don't even need to have an MR necessarily yet. And then some other features that already exist now is you can see the pipelines running in the IDE as it's going. You can see the job logs even of the scan job. So if there are errors or anything, you can actually see that right there in the IDE. And then once the results get processed, it is pretty similar to the MR widget in the corner of the screen. So next to where the pipelines go in the workflow extension, there's sort of a new security tree view thing. So that's where it's starting. That got a little bit delayed. It turns out the extension is a little bit harder to develop in than we expected, but still actively being worked on. Then beyond that, you start to see more, honestly, it goes more toward my area because static analysis is often what you want to do in an IDE. So you will start to see a little bit more of a reduction in that way. We want to do kind of the same thing though, but where in the MR, you'll be able to see SAS findings in the diff and the changes view. We're working on that now. You'll want to see something similar to that in the IDE. It gets complicated because you have uncommitted changes in the IDE and you only have committed changes in an MR. But finding a way to kind of fuse those in a way that makes sense, that's where you'll see the IDE going. Maybe one final note is that secret detection is likely to do some more stuff on the developer machine than SAS, just because of the difference in once you push a leak, it's leaked. You can't fix it like you can just fix a SAS fault. So you'll see maybe a little more focus on the secret stuff, trying to keep it on the box instead of getting pushed at all. And then that would manifest in the IDE as well.
Makes sense. Do we see, like, have we thought through, like, what would be are we going to be betting on like the MR sort of philosophy versus the IDE philosophy, or do we sort of plan to support both in parallel?
I understand you're kind of saying like the MR philosophy is what's the new changes, and the IDE philosophy is more like in the source code viewer as you're typing, you're seeing all the findings.
Yeah, it seems like there could be sort of duplicate work there, like we're sort of linting or checking within the code review, but then also within the IDE view. I'd be curious to see from even like developers' perspective what's noisy and what makes most sense for them. And curious if you have any insight on that.
Right. So generally, I think the answer is both, because your ultimate goal is to not get a security vulnerability in production. The next step in is the MR, the code review stage. The next step in from that is when the code's actually getting written. So the more we can bring the context to the developer without making them save the file, commit it, push it, wait. More we can just tell them right away, the more likely you are to actually get that vulnerability resolved in an efficient manner. Sorry, I lost the other part of your question.
I think you answered it all. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it, Connor.
No worries.
And Manjeet?
Yeah, hey, so I was just curious to check on what's happening with AI ML with respect to security and govern. Just because that's the flavor of topic for past few weeks, and I do see like there are some links which were added to the question here.
So we shipped in like a week's time the first iteration of Explain This Vulnerability. There was an option to make it like a chat, but we wanted to see, this is an experimental feature. Do users really need to have that chat interface? So instead they can just click a button and get that further explanation of, okay, what is this vulnerability and how would I go about fixing it? In the beta version, if we decide to pursue that, we will try and get a better understanding of, hey, is this even helpful? Was this useful for you? And then we've got a lot of other really good ideas that Sam did a great job of organizing. And I also have just like a general vision that we are in the process of reviewing. These are things that are just in flux, changing really quickly. I like left on Friday, came back on Monday, and everything was different. So take that with a grain of salt. I think you have a follow-up question that I could also probably help answer. So do you want to voice over that?
Yeah, so the next question is more about like, is there a chat GPT kind of interface where I can ask questions with respect to security, more from the CISO side? Like CISOs, they just want to understand what is the security posture for my entire applications, which project is more secure, why it's so secure, what's happening. So how they can surface that kind of information. So that's what I was trying to understand. Is there something happening? I'm like, I saw like you dropped a link around Chat GPT.
So we haven't gone in that specific direction, but Sarah over in Create is working on the Tanuki, I think they're calling it the GitLab knowledge bot, where a user can chat in that Chat GPT like format with a large language model. And it will be, I believe it will be trained on our own knowledge base. There are thoughts of extending that to security related personas specifically, but it's not something that we have like put our finger on just yet.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, just because just curious, playing and just exploring so many things happening past 2 months. I was like, okay, I'll check like what's happening, or probably ask a few things which may be helpful down the line.
Yeah, and I think if you haven't already, if you could add your ideas and thoughts to that AI analysis possible use cases and tag myself or Sam, that would be super helpful.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining today. Appreciate your engagement and participation here. Have a great rest of the day.